When Ethan Marlowe stepped into the NPS Visitor Center in August 2017, he was barely recognizable, barefoot, skeletal thin, with long matted hair and wearing tattered clothes as if he had just crawled out from underground. The man had been missing for 4 years in one of the harshest wilderness areas of Death Valley, a man whom his family, SAR teams, and the public had long believed was dead. But the most terrifying thing was not his appearance. The most terrifying thing was what he carried in his canvas bag, traces that recounted 4 years of horror beneath the desert, and about who might still be out there. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On an afternoon in July 2013, the sun hung low over the heart of Death Valley National Park, casting a scorching heat across the rocky canyons and barren valleys, promising a sweltering day under a clear, cloudless sky. For many visitors, this was the ideal time to explore the park's distinctive geological formations, or admire the fiery golden hues of late afternoon light on Golden Canyon. But for 32-year-old Ethan Marlowe, that afternoon marked the beginning of a journey that was only supposed to last a few hours before it turned into 4 years of complete disappearance. According to his family when speaking with rangers, Ethan was an experienced trekker, familiar with western terrain, and always planned his trips meticulously. That day, his goal was to conquer the Golden Canyon, Manly Beacon, Red Cathedral Road. A well-known trail, but one that required good navigation skills due to many unmarked side branches. Late in the afternoon, the camera at the Golden Canyon entrance recorded Ethan's dark-colored SUV pulling into the gravel parking area. He was alone. The checkpoint staff noted that Ethan appeared calm and focused, carrying a light backpack with minimal gear for a short hike. Water, energy bars, a thin jacket, and a personal locator device. After a few minutes checking his equipment, Ethan left the vehicle and headed into the canyon. Golden Canyon is not a straightforward trail. Many sections lack signage, relying solely on natural rock grooves and faint paths for navigation. According to one hiker who was behind him for the first half hour or so, Ethan turned into a narrow side branch leading deep into a less traveled area, an uncommon but not unusual choice for trekkers who enjoy exploring, though it made the return route far more unpredictable. Near dusk, Ethan's family received a short text message from him saying the area was very quiet and the signal was getting weaker. That was the last signal he sent out. His family immediately replied, urging him to be careful and return on schedule as planned, but no response ever reached Ethan's device. When the sun fully set behind the rock ranges and Ethan still hadn't returned to his vehicle or checked in with the ranger station as promised, worry quickly turned to panic. His family knew his habits well. Ethan had never broken a schedule without prior notice, especially in harsh conditions like Death Valley. By nightfall, as the desert sank into an unusually cold and silent darkness, they officially contacted the park's ranger service to report Ethan Marlowe missing. Immediately after receiving the report, the National Park Service Rangers, in coordination with the Death Valley Search and Rescue Team, activated the initial phase of the SAR operation, following standard protocol for missing persons in desert terrain. The search began at the Golden Canyon trailhead, the last point where Ethan was captured on camera, using a grid search pattern to cover the entire main corridor of the trail. Rangers divided into small teams, each assigned to sweep a specific strip of terrain to ensure no area was overlooked nearby. While ground teams conducted grid searches, the aviation unit deployed drones equipped with thermal cameras to scan from above, taking advantage of the temperature contrast between a human body and the ground to detect heat signatures. In Death Valley's nighttime conditions, where temperatures drop sharply and the open air has few obstructions, drones could cover a wide area, but after multiple consecutive sweeps, the equipment detected no signs consistent with a living person or a body. In parallel, a canine team was brought in from the Inyo County unit, with 2 trailing dogs specialized in tracking missing persons in hot, dry terrain. The canines swore given Ethan's scent from the area around his vehicle, and then led into the main entrance of Golden Canyon. In the early phase, The dogs picked up a faint scent trail consistent with the time Ethan left his car, but when they reached the spot where the witness reported Ethan turning into the narrow side branch, the scent abruptly vanished. This break forced the search team to mark it as the first point of interest, though no firm conclusions could be drawn without direct evidence. During visual sweeps, SAR found no personal items such as a hat, water bottle, gloves, or electronic devices left along the path, items that are commonly found in most cases of trekkers in distress or disoriented. There were no clear footprints leading off the main trail, nor any ground disturbances indicating Ethan had stopped, fallen, or tried to leave a signal. The complete absence of physical signs prompted the team to expand the search radius beyond the usual trails, focusing on rockslide areas, crevices, and zones where a person could have fallen or become hidden from drone view. Search teams pushed deeper into less traveled side branches, relying entirely on natural landmarks and geological maps. By the end of the first search day, despite significantly expanding the coverage to include most plausible directions from Ethan's last known position, SAR had found no traces, heat signals, or dropped items that could indicate his path or condition. The lack of data forced the teams to continue broadening the scope in the following hours, maintaining denser search patterns to account for the possibility that Ethan had veered off the main route in an unpredictable direction. Moving into the second search day, with the grid expanded beyond Golden Canyon into steeper terrain, a SAR team operating on the southeast slope of Manly Beacon discovered the first potentially related clue. On a patch of fine sand swept by wind, they recorded a single set of footprints heading toward a narrow rock crevice. The size and depth of these prints did not match Ethan's trekking shoes, previously compared using samples of the footwear he typically wore, nor did they align with his body weight or gait as provided by family data. These were someone else's footprints, gender unknown, relatively fresh but faded enough to indicate they had endured at least one strong wind event. The discovery was immediately flagged and coordinates sent to command, opening the possibility of a second individual's presence in the area where Ethan was last seen. As they continued sweeping the downslope area nearby, another team found a long drag mark cutting across cracked clay soil, extending nearly 20 feet. The drag surface suggested a heavy object had been pulled, but there were no signs of rolling or a fall from height. SAR experts quickly ruled out a simple slip-and-fall accident, as an unbalanced slide typically leaves torn earth, scattered rocks, or gouge marks in the direction of impact, whereas this drag was flat, even, and formed a horizontal pull line. This forced the search team to question whether the person responsible for the drag was intentionally moving something or someone. On a sweep line, several hundred meters east of this location, ground support recorded an even more striking find: tire tracks imprinted on hard-packed ground, located precisely in an area the park map designated as vehicle prohibited since 1995 due to subsidence risk. The tracks were uniformly deep, indicating a vehicle had traveled there when the ground was still soft enough to hold impressions, yet there were no clear turnaround or exit tracks, as if the vehicle had entered and departed using the same wheel ruts to minimize additional marks. This information was logged immediately and cross-checked against the area's vehicle registration logs, which showed no authorized vehicles in that zone on the day Ethan vanished. With 3 anomalies: footprints not belonging to Ethan, an unusual long drag mark, and tire tracks in a restricted area, SAR Command was compelled to pursue 2 parallel investigative hypotheses. The first, that Ethan deliberately left the main trail, leading to disorientation or an incident on the valley's edge. The second, gaining more weight from the scene data, suggesting Ethan may have encountered or been approached by another person, and that an unregistered vehicle could have been present in the vicinity around the time he disappeared. However, without direct evidence linking these traces to Ethan, SAR had to continue expanding the search. Based on the 2 hypotheses, the team pushed deeper into hard-to-access terrain, including steep rock gullies leading to the Badlands Loop, crevices covered by recent rockfall debris, and salt flats mixed with golden sand, where strong winds could erase footprints within hours. Search teams were deployed in fan patterns to sweep along slopes where a person might have been dragged, slid, or attempted a shortcut down to the valley floor. K-9 units were also brought into the wider area to check for any re-emerging scent trails, but strong gusts and rapidly changing surfaces made scent retention nearly impossible. Drone operations increased in frequency, flying lower and using surface scan mode to detect any terrain anomalies such as disturbed soil, displaced rocks, or unusual objects standing out against Golden Canyon's uniform ground. Still, beyond the initial 3 clues, no further reliable discoveries emerged to pinpoint the next direction of travel or a likely location Ethan had passed through. Death Valley's layered terrain, with deep rock fissures, sink gullies and naturally eroded side paths, made reconstructing Ethan's route far more difficult than in typical trekking areas. By the end of the second search day, the appearance of strange footprints, an abnormal drag mark, and vehicle tracks had begun to form a more complex picture, indicating the disappearance was no longer purely a case of a lost trekker. However, the lack of direct evidence tied to Ethan prevented SAR from narrowing the focus or shifting approaches, forcing the teams to keep expanding operations into more rugged areas in the hours ahead. When the 3 unusual traces were recorded, but could not be directly linked to Ethan, SAR Command shifted to in-depth analysis to determine whether scientific data could predict his likely path or incident location, starting with collecting all meteorological data for Death Valley during the period Ethan went missing. Readings from wind stations at Golden Canyon, Furnace Creek, and Zabriskie Point showed wind speeds fluctuating between 18 and 32 miles per hour that afternoon and evening, with strong gusts directed down into the Badlands Valley. 3D terrain-modeled surface wind simulations revealed that any exposed traces, especially body scent or footprints on fine sand, could be nearly completely erased within tens of minutes. This explained the K-9's sudden loss of scent exactly at the side branch turn and why SAR found no continuous footprint chains beyond the camera-captured position. Additionally, the analysis team cross-referenced the time Ethan's personal GPS device went offline, based on the final ping data from the carrier. Records showed the device lost connection around 6:12 p.m., just over half an hour after Ethan left the trailhead, an anomaly for an experienced trekker who always checked his battery beforehand. The abrupt shutdown, without gradual signal degradation, prevented analysts from determining how far Ethan had traveled from the camera point or whether external factors had affected the device. Further sweeps of areas zoned under the initial 2 hypotheses found no signs of a person in physical distress, such as sweat residue on rocks, fall marks, claw scratches from gripping walls, or rest points typical in exhaustion cases. Even the smallest indicators, like energy bar wrappers, food packaging, or dropped water bottles, common in disorientation incidents, were entirely absent. The search area in Death Valley offered no natural shelters like rock overhangs or high ledges for someone in trouble to rest under, so the lack of stop points or abandoned gear further reduced the likelihood of Ethan succumbing to natural exhaustion during the trek. After 3 days of radius expansion and 3 approach adjustments with no new data gained, SAR reached the operational limits allowed by protocol from all collected information, including strange footprints, drag mark, tire tracks, simulated wind models, and GPS shutdown time. No single factor was strong enough to justify further expansion without risking personnel. With no direct or indirect evidence to define a focal area, SAR Command terminated the operation per safety and resource standards, transferring the full case file to the National Park Service's Missing Persons Unit. In the summary report, SAR noted that Ethan Marlowe had left the registered trail, vanished shortly after departing the trailhead, and left behind no signs of exhaustion, physical evidence, or any trackable path. There was no basis to confirm an accident, but also no evidence to establish third-party involvement. Per NPS procedure, when a person remains missing beyond 72 hours with no clear traces, the case is reclassified as missing presumed deceased. Ethan was added to that list, ending the active search phase and closing what was at that point an event with no reliable leads indicating what had happened to him inside North America's hottest desert. After the SAR campaign concluded, and Ethan Marlowe's file was changed to missing presumed deceased status, the case was transferred to the NPS Cold Case Review Unit for post-review evaluation in accordance with the protocol for missing persons cases with no trace evidence. From late 2013 through the entire 2014-2017 period, this dedicated team compiled all technical data related to the case, including detailed topographic maps of the Golden Canyon area and its side branches, WEN models constructed during the SAR operation, meteorological data at the time of the disappearance, the exact time the personal GPS device lost signal, and all ground search team reports. The anomalous traces identified during the SAR phase, footprints that did not match Ethan's, an unusually long drag mark, and tire tracks appearing in a vehicle-prohibited area, were all reanalyzed using an exclusion method. For the unfamiliar footprints, the review team concluded that the time elapsed between their discovery and the possible time they were made was too great to establish a direct link to Ethan's disappearance. The area was not strictly off-limits, and the possibility that another trekker or maintenance personnel had passed through could not be entirely ruled out. Regarding the drag mark, data showed that Death Valley terrain frequently exhibits natural drag streaks caused by rolling rocks or clay patches eroded by temporary runoff, making any conclusion about intentional dragging of an object lack clear supporting evidence. As for the tire tracks in the vehicle-prohibited zone, reviewers re-examined records from previous decades and found that although the route had been closed, certain geological survey vehicles had been granted access to the area in various years, meaning the tire impressions could have been created outside the time frame of Ethan's disappearance. When cross-referencing these three traces with the moment Ethan's GPS device lost power, at 6:12 p.m., the cold case review raised the issue that the sudden signal cutoff did not sufficiently prove third-party interference, as numerous disappearance cases recorded in the same year involved victims' GPS devices or phones shutting down abruptly due to battery failure, overheating, or prolonged loss of signal. The team also reviewed K9 and drone reports throughout the SAR campaign and concluded that the absence of physical or thermal evidence was consistent with Death Valley terrain conditions, where strong winds and fluctuating temperatures can erase traces within just hours. After comprehensive review, the cold case review determined that although there were suggestive anomalies, none reached the level of certainty required to declare criminal activity or justify launching a new search campaign. All data remained in a state of logical disconnection. No direct physical evidence of Ethan after the camera point, no emergency signal sent, no drag marks, impact points, or signs of exhaustion, and no sufficiently clear sequence of events to guide an investigation. With the final conclusion that the file had no prospect of advancement without new data, Ethan Marlowe's disappearance case was officially archived at the end of 2017. Per protocol, file DV-13-217 was classified as a cold case, lacking sufficient grounds for reopening to remain so until new evidence or additional information emerged from witnesses, surveillance systems, or independent sources. Throughout this period, no element met that threshold, and the case continued in its existing status, referenced as an unexplained disappearance under the harsh desert conditions of Death Valley. 4 years after file DV-13-217 was archived, on a morning in August 2021, staff on duty at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center observed a man staggering into the lobby in severe exhaustion, his clothing covered in desert dust and his skin heavily sunburned and darkened. The man carried no water, no backpack, only clutching tightly to an old worn canvas bag with faint signs of abrasion. When asked to sit down, he nearly collapsed, breathing raggedly, speech halting, and showing severe disorientation. NPS staff immediately activated the emergency assistance protocol for suspected victims wandering in extreme weather conditions and requested his identity. The man's first response was barely audible, but when asked to repeat, he said his name was Ethan. a name that prompted the staff to immediately notify superiors, as it matched the individual reported missing in that same area 4 years earlier. To verify, NPS performed fingerprint scanning via a mobile device linked to federal databases. The comparison took over a minute, and the results matched completely with the biometric records Ethan Marlowe had provided when applying for his permit in 2013. This match was instantly relayed to the NPS Coordination Center, where file DV-13-217 remained on record as an unexplained cold case. The sudden reappearance within park boundaries of someone previously classified as missing and presumed deceased required NPS to reactivate the file and immediately notify the Internal Investigations Unit and the Federal Cold Case Management System. Meanwhile, the emergency medical team conducted an on-site assessment of Ethan's condition at the visitor center. Initial findings included severe dehydration, prolonged physical exhaustion, disorientation, and multiple old wounds healed in a manner inconsistent with proper medical care. The canvas bag he carried was separated, sealed as evidence per protocol pending evaluation, as it was unclear whether it was his original personal item or related to the period of his disappearance. When questioned about where he might have escaped from or how far he had traveled in desert conditions, Ethan could not provide coherent information. His speech was fragmented, disjointed, lacking chronological order, and indicative of prolonged malnutrition or isolation. The man was transported by federal ambulance to the frontline medical facility in the town of Pahrump for initial stabilization before transfer into the federal healthcare system, in accordance with regulations for long-term missing persons recovered under unusual circumstances. Following successful identity verification and classification of Ethan's condition as belonging to the category of victim recovered after prolonged unexplained absence, the Federal Cold Case Oversight Agency immediately issued an order to reactivate file DV-13-217. All related documents, including SAR reports, wind model data, scene traces, GPS history, and cold case review assessments from 2013 to 2017, were returned to active status for appraisal. Within hours of Ethan's appearance, an investigative team was dispatched to the visitor center to collect evidence, prepare an initial contact report, and ready subsequent specialized evaluations. The reappearance, alive but severely debilitated, of someone presumed missing for 4 years with no signs of survival completely altered the perspective on the case, forcing the system to shift from the assessment of disappearance in harsh environment to a situation requiring investigation into the cause of prolonged survival. Although Ethan could not yet provide any coherent explanation for his 4 years of absence, his sudden emergence, along with the sealed canvas bag, was sufficient to compel authorities to re-examine the entire DV-13-217 file from the ground up, no longer treating it as a wilderness accident. As old assumptions were called into question, the investigative focus immediately shifted from what happened to what Ethan must have endured. Shortly thereafter, at the federal medical facility where Ethan Marlowe was transferred for stabilization of vital functions, the forensic medical team began a comprehensive series of tests to evaluate his biological condition and the cumulative damage accumulated over 4 years of disappearance. Even from the initial examinations, physicians identified numerous indicators inconsistent with survival in the wild, and instead showing strong alignment with patterns of injury commonly seen in victims of long-term captivity in controlled environments. Skin and serum tests revealed severely low vitamin D levels, a deficiency characteristic of individuals living in environments with restricted light exposure over extended periods. Skin tissue samples from the back and forearms showed reduced collagen density, consistent with extremely low natural light exposure, ruling out the possibility that he had spent most of the missing period outdoors. Examination of the ankles and wrists revealed continuous circular scar patterns with varying scar depth across tissue layers, indicating repeated friction against rigid ring-shaped objects over a prolonged period. A type of injury typical of individuals restrained by shackles or fixed restraints, rather than random trekking abrasions. Some areas around the ankles showed old, resolved edema, reflecting past prolonged poor circulation due to constriction from metallic objects. To determine nutritional status during the 4 years of absence, specialists conducted segmented hair analysis via mass spectrometry, dividing the hair into growth cycle segments. Results showed alternating phases of malnutrition and minimal nutrition recurring regularly over multi-week intervals, reflecting a pattern of restricted or controlled feeding. Microfractures in the hair's keratin structure further suggested prolonged cortisol stress consistent with a coerced environment rather than free outdoor activity. Muscle strength testing revealed severe atrophy, particularly in the lower limbs, inconsistent with someone who had engaged in long-distance hiking or extensive movement in rugged terrain. A movement specialist determined that Ethan's degree of muscle wasting corresponded to someone capable only of very limited movement in a confined space over a long period, with characteristic weakening of hip and thigh muscle groups associated with prolonged sitting or standing in place rather than locomotion. X-ray and MRI imaging additionally revealed old bone injuries, such as healed rib fractures that had mended without proper medical alignment, indicating Ethan had sustained significant blunt force to the chest in the past without treatment. The lower spine showed mild misalignment consistent with prolonged sitting on hard, unstable surfaces. Blood and urine tests detected accumulated low but persistent levels of benzodiazepine-class sedatives, inconsistent with self-administration due to the regular cyclic fluctuation in concentration, suggesting Ethan had been given small, repeated doses over an extended period. This was also the cause of the disorientation and impaired coherent memory in the initial period after recovery. When synthesizing all biological markers, soft tissue injuries, osteoarticular findings, hair segmentation, and skin traces, the forensic team reached a unified conclusion that Ethan Marlowe had not been wandering in the wilderness for the 4 years of his disappearance, but had instead been held in a confined, low-light space, physically restrained by fixation devices, subjected to controlled nutrition, and likely maintained in a state of cyclic sedation. This conclusion was forwarded directly to the Federal Investigative Unit for inclusion in File DV-13-217 as the first medical evidence confirming that the 2013 disappearance was not a trekking accident, but a process of long-term captivity under deliberate and tightly controlled conditions. Once Ethan's condition was temporarily stabilized, and the canvas bag he carried was transferred to the Federal Evidence Examination Division, technicians began the process of collecting, cataloging, and analyzing each component inside according to criminal investigation standards. As these were the only objects capable of providing clues about where Ethan had been during the 4 years. Inside the bag were 5 prominent items of evidence: a crumpled sheet of paper containing a hand-drawn map in pencil, a metal key engraved with code B47, a piece of gray-white alloy coated in mineral dust, a torn segment of dark fabric, and a length of electrical wire with scorched ends. The hand-drawn map was examined first. Though rough and small in scale, the paper depicted 3 circles arranged in a triangular formation, connected by lines simulating varying elevation terrain. Faint notations along the edges suggested the drawer was attempting to recreate the structure of an area rather than retracing an official trail. When compared to Death Valley topographic maps, technicians noted that the slope ratios depicted in the drawing showed similarity to the terrain pattern of the eastern ridge area, where natural tiered rock ledges often form 3 relatively similar high points, though the precise location could not be immediately confirmed. The second item, key B47, was analyzed via XRF spectroscopy, identifying its primary metal composition as industrial-grade carbon steel, typically used for heavy-duty locks or storage facility locks from older systems. The keyway profile indicated compatibility not with residential locks, but with features characteristic of vault doors, technical storage rooms, or equipment lockers outside civilian systems. The mineral-dusted alloy fragment was subjected to SM-EDS analysis, revealing a high borate content consistent with borax-type minerals commonly found in historic mining sites in Death Valley. particularly those operated in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This suggested Ethan may have had direct contact with a structure located near or within a borate-bearing geological zone rather than a standard trekking area. The dark fabric segment was cleaned and separated for DNA analysis. Fiber structure analysis identified it as coarse industrial woven material typically used for sacks, machinery covers, or technical curtains, not material from Ethan's clothing. The presence of this fabric in the canvas bag raised questions for the examiners as to whether it had inadvertently come from an item at Ethan's location of captivity or had been deliberately brought by him. Finally, the scorched electrical wire was examined for insulation layers and copper core. Results indicated it belonged to an older industrial floodlight type, designed for temporary lighting systems in underground works or decommissioned technical facilities. When synthesizing all 5 items, the analysis team observed that none related to trekking or outdoor survival activities. Instead, they aligned with characteristics of an artificial, structured, once electrified environment, likely situated in a historic borate geological zone. Based on the hand-drawn map, they created comparative simulations against topographic maps to determine whether the 3 circles represented 3 high points or 3 distinct locations within the same area. The relative match with contour lines in the eastern ridge prompted the analysis team to begin forming the hypothesis that during his 4 years missing, Ethan had been inside or near a technical facility in an undisclosed area of the park's trail system. Although no item pinpointed an exact location, the hand-drawn map was regarded as the most valuable investigative lead, as it was the only object reflecting Ethan's effort to describe his surroundings. From the material evidence and geological connections, the analysis team recommended opening a new investigative direction based on the assumption of an artificial underground structure existing within Death Valley's historic borate region, potentially containing equipment, materials, and locks compatible with Key B47. This finding was immediately forwarded to the team responsible for file DV13217 as the basis for the next phase of tracing. After the evidence analysis team concluded that Ethan's hand-drawn map could potentially describe a structure or area located within a borate-bearing geological zone, the Federal Terrain Analysis Unit began reconstructing the 2013 movement route using a GIS system combined with elevation data, geological models, and original SAR data. The objective was to determine whether the 3 circles on the hand-drawn map correlated with any clusters of high points or terrain features within the range Ethan could have been taken to after leaving the trailhead. Based on camera footage of Ethan entering Golden Canyon and the time his GPS device was turned off at 6:12 p.m., the analysis team simulated radius zones that a person or vehicle could reach in under 1 hour. The GIS generated a 3-layer map. The first layer showed feasible on-foot travel routes if Ethan had left the trail voluntarily. The second layer simulated travel distances if vehicle intervention occurred. The third layer marked geological zones matching high borate content to cross-reference, with the alloy fragment found in the canvas bag. When overlaying Ethan's hand-drawn map onto a 3D model of Death Valley, the analysis team observed that the proportional distances between the 3 circles on the map showed some correlation with 3 natural high points located east of the Black Mountains Range, in an area known as Eastern Ridge. The lines connecting the 3 points on Ethan's rough sketch also reasonably approximated actual field elevation changes, indicating the drawer had attempted to recreate terrain steps rather than drawing arbitrary lines. To strengthen the hypothesis, the analysis team took remaining mineral samples from Ethan's shoes, collected during hospitalization, and compared them to soil, dust, and mineral samples from various park areas stored in the NPS Geology Lab. ED's results showed high similarity between the mineral dust adhering to Ethan's shoe soles and soil samples from the Eastern Ridge area, particularly in the crystalline borate structure. This level of similarity was significantly stronger than in any area along the Golden Canyon route or its side branches that SAR had checked in 2013, indicating Ethan's presence at a location far outside the legal trekking range. After identifying the preliminary suspect area, GIS continued analyzing possible access routes to Eastern Ridge. Historical NPS maps showed several technical trails closed since the 1980s due to subsidence risks and no longer appearing on tourist maps. One of these was a narrow dirt road that once connected the old borax mine system to the valley edge. Vehicle access simulation identified this closed route as one of very few paths allowing a vehicle to enter the Eastern Ridge area without passing main checkpoints or cameras. According to the model data, if a vehicle had entered via this old route and then reversed back along its own tire tracks, the tire marks could become difficult to trace, matching the 2013 SAR tire tracks that showed no clear turnaround signs. From the three data sources, the hand-drawn map, minerals on Ethan's shoes, and GIS modeling, the terrain analysis unit officially narrowed the suspect area to Eastern Ridge, determining it as the only zone satisfying all three factors, matching Ethan's three-point diagram, geological correspondence with physical evidence, and lying within the range a vehicle could travel from Golden Canyon during the time Ethan's GPS was off. The 2013 movement reconstruction using GIS did not pinpoint the exact location where Ethan may have been held, but it clarified that he could not have walked to this area himself due to extreme terrain differences and insufficient time. This reinforced the conclusion that the route to Eastern Ridge was not part of any legal park trekking corridor, and that vehicle entry-exit in the area during Ethan's disappearance was entirely plausible. With these findings, the analysis team transferred the report to the proactive investigation team for case DV-13-217 to expand on-site evaluation in the new direction. After narrowing the suspect area to Eastern Ridge based on GIS analysis, the Federal Geology Unit further expanded evaluation of the borate alloy fragment found in Ethan's canvas bag to determine its precise origin within Death Valley. Using EDS spectroscopy and comparing mineral samples to archived data from historical borax mines, the analysis team cross-referenced the borate composition in the alloy with three areas mined in the late 19th century: Harmony Borax Works, Old Harmony Borax Worksite, and the Eagle Mine area. After multiple comparisons, the borate adhering to the alloy fragment in Ethan's bag showed the highest similarity to samples from Old Harmony Borax Worksite, a facility shut down in the early 20th century and now reduced to buried foundation remnants under sediment layers. The mineral composition of the evidence, particularly the boron isotope ratio, matched at a level the geology team assessed as very likely to share the same origin, reinforcing the hypothesis that the canvas bag or its carrier had contacted the area near or within this former borax mining zone. In parallel with mineral analysis, the Field Technical Unit reevaluated the tire tracks recorded in the 2013 SAR. Archived imagery showed the remaining tread pattern incomplete but sufficient to identify it as belonging to a pickup truck tire group, a design common in the late 1990s. Cross-referencing with the database of vehicles recorded near park side routes during the month of disappearance, the analysis team ruled out all legally registered vehicles, NPS staff vehicles, and those of geologists who had worked nearby. After elimination, less than 2% probability remained that the tire tracks belonged to a legitimate vehicle. Based on tread depth and wear, technicians determined the tires belonged to a light truck model from 1997-2004, a type better suited for desert terrain than standard vehicles. This aligned with the prior conclusion that an unregistered vehicle could have entered the restricted area during Ethan's disappearance window. With two factors, mineral match to Old Harmony Borax Worksite and tire tracks indicating possible entry into closed terrain, the on-site oversight unit decided to redeploy drones, this time focusing entirely on the rugged, uneven terrain of Eastern Ridge, characterized by eroded rock ridges and subsided earth steps that once served as industrial foundations. Drones equipped with thermal cameras and LiDAR sensors flew in arc patterns, scanning subareas to detect surface structure anomalies such as covered depressions, high-porosity ground patches, or artificial ventilation traces. After nearly 2 hours of scanning, the LiDAR system detected a small anomaly between two rock ridges about 50 meters apart, a circular structure buried under desert sediment and dust with a diameter of less than 1 meter. Simultaneously, the thermal camera recorded a very slight temperature differential around the structure's edge, differing from the natural rock surface temperature, suggesting a possible subsurface void. When the drone descended for detailed scanning, imagery revealed a metal grid face covered by a recently poured layer of sand, located precisely within the borate-rich geological zone, matching the evidence analysis. This discovery was confirmed as a ventilation shaft, a structure typical of old technical tunnels or underground facilities, no longer appearing on modern park maps due to decades of burial. The ventilation shaft's location, accessible only via a route closed since the 1980s, led the analysis team to assess it as directly related to Ethan's evidence. Combining all data on minerals, tire tracks, and drone survey, the investigation unit concluded that the Old Harmony Borax worksite area was most likely the key location requiring access to determine where Ethan had been held during his 4 years of disappearance. After the drone detected what appeared to be a covered ventilation shaft within the Old Harmony Borax worksite area, a federal field team was dispatched to the site to conduct direct excavation, beginning with removal of newly accumulated sand layers and surrounding rock debris. Once the thin sediment cover was cleared, the metal grid structure became clearly visible, revealing it was not industrial debris, but the head of a lattice-designed ventilation pipe once used for air circulation in underground technical tunnels. Continuing excavation around the grid edge, the field team discovered a larger metal hatch immediately below, buried under approximately 30 to 40 centimeters of soil. The hatch had old, lightly corroded hinges, but remained sufficiently intact to identify it as engineered structure rather than loose metal. Subsidence prevention specialists were called to assess safety due to the site's old mine foundation and subsidence risk. After confirming no immediate collapse signs, the team opened the hatch using mechanical lifting equipment since the hinges were too rusted for manual operation. When the hatch was lifted, a cold air current escaped from below, indicating a relatively large void beneath the soil. The opening led to an inclined tunnel with an approximate 25-degree slope, its walls shored with old metal beams, many corroded but still structurally sound. A tethered camera was lowered first for safety assessment. Transmitted images showed the tunnel extending about 8 meters before opening into a horizontal space. Once the area was confirmed free of toxic gas or immediate collapse risk, the investigation team descended using specialized ladders. The space at the end of the slope was a small rectangular room, approximately 2 meters wide and 3 meters long. Flashlight sweeps across the walls revealed numerous water rust streaks along old support beams, and the floor consisted of worn, patchy concrete, distinct from the natural dirt floor typical of abandoned open-pit mine workings. In the center of the room stood a single metal bed frame, rusted but intact in shape. Remnants of an old removed mattress pad were still visible on the frame. In the opposite corner, a heavily oxidized iron chain segment with a lock ring was found, one end fixed directly to a wall support beam, the other end featuring a bent hook lock. Next to the chain hung an industrial light bulb suspended from the ceiling by scorched electrical wire, similar to evidence found in Ethan's canvas bag. This match was immediately documented as direct linkage to items seized from the victim. Room surfaces clearly showed signs of prolonged use, the concrete floor worn into small arc-shaped paths, consistent with restricted pacing in a narrow space. Wall edges displayed numerous scratch marks and uneven dust accumulation, suggesting frequent contact points. On the left wall, the investigation team discovered manually scratched tally marks made with a hard object, clusters of small vertical lines grouped in fives, extending from near the floor up to adult chest height. This indicated a long-term captive marking time, with far more marks than could be left by someone wandering in the desert for a brief period. The field team collected DNA samples from the bed surface, chain area, and wall near the tally marks. Swabs were used to collect residual epithelial cells from the chain ring, small metal door handle, and bed frame. In addition to DNA, microenvironmental samples were taken: dust, corner sediment, fabric fiber fragments caught on supports, and metal debris from the burned lighting fixture. Each sample was sealed per standard protocol in specialized bags, labeled with timestamps and coordinates for lab analysis. Faint fingerprints were also found on the inner hatch surface and a bed frame segment, photographed and treated with fluorescent powder for contrast enhancement before formal collection. Upon completing the initial survey, the investigation team drafted a preliminary sketch of the tunnel, an artificial slope descent leading to a small confinement room containing ample evidence of prolonged human restraint and habitation. All evidence, from chains, bed, light bulb, floorware patterns, to DNA and microenvironmental samples, was forwarded for forensic processing, marking the first time in case DV-13217, a physical site emerged, capable of explaining Ethan Marlowe's 4-year disappearance period. After fully documenting the main confinement room, the investigation team expanded the survey within the tunnel and discovered a narrow side passage behind the metal supports, where thick dust and faint floor wear indicated infrequent human traffic compared to the confinement area. This passage led to a larger but low-ceilinged auxiliary room where flashlight beams immediately illuminated an array of deliberately arranged supplies, confirming the existence of a support zone for operating the confinement space. On a decayed wooden shelf against the wall sat numerous canned goods, water bottles, a basic first aid kit, and low-dose sedative medication bottles, all still labeled but expired. Some bottles contained antiseptic solution and torn bandage packaging, indicating the user had treated minor injuries under deprived conditions. The quantity of supplies was sufficient to sustain one person for many months, further supporting the assessment that this was not an abandoned site, but one actively maintained over a long period. In a corner of the room, the team found a rusted but still functional iron drawer. When pried open, it contained numerous old technical drawings showing longitudinal and cross-sectional views of the entire tunnel system. These diagrams revealed the tunnel extended beyond the 2 observed rooms, with additional design passages later blocked or filled. Handwritten notes and symbols on the plans indicated old ventilation points, electrical routing to former light locations, and support beams at risk of failure, proving the operator had thorough knowledge of the system's engineering and actively monitored its condition. Examining the entire auxiliary room, investigators found multiple small wall niches, likely once used for storing personal items or repair tools. These niches contained electrical wire scraps, screws, short metal pipe segments, and wood pieces, showing fresher saw marks than the rest of the structure. Some niches also held coarse fabric bags, similar to the fiber type found in Ethan's canvas bag, strengthening the link between evidence and the underground facility. The presence of small but clearly organized storage points indicated the tunnel operator worked methodically, preparing to sustain the facility long-term without frequent external resupply. The most striking discovery in the auxiliary room was inside a wooden box placed under the supply shelf. A collection of old Polaroid photographs, mostly faded but still recognizable as depicting people in varied contexts. Preliminary review showed some faces matching missing persons cases recorded in Death Valley and surrounding areas since the early 2000s. There were photos of a young man in emaciated condition, a woman standing against a wall with similar tally marks as the main confinement room, and several others showing tunnel angles when fully lit. These photographs were immediately sealed per evidence protocol, as they not only proved the presence of other individuals in the tunnel, but confirmed the facility had been used multiple times over the years, not solely since Ethan's disappearance. In the opposite corner, a thick hardcover notebook covered in dust was found wedged in a low wall crevice. Upon opening, Its pages revealed maintenance log entries recording dates of ventilation system checks, support beam repairs, electrical wire replacements, and supply restocking. Though many pages had faded ink, legible portions showed maintenance activity spanning years with scattered timestamps, aligning with periods of multiple regional disappearances. The log also noted technical issues such as tunnel dampness, failed wiring, and the need for additional ventilation digging. The existence of a maintenance log clearly demonstrated that this underground tunnel was not an abandoned relic, but a systematically operated facility with periodic inspections and ensured long-term functionality. With all evidence from the auxiliary room, from sedatives, medical supplies, tunnel system technical diagrams, storage niches, Polaroid collection, to the maintenance log, the investigation team understood that this subterranean structure was not only a place of Ethan's confinement, but likely had been used for multiple prolonged purposes, with meticulous preparation and deep knowledge of the infrastructure. When all the evidence from the auxiliary room and the cell was submitted for forensic analysis, one of the first breakthrough results came from the fingerprint processing unit. Among the fingerprints recovered from the interior surface of the metal lid, the bed frame rail, and the edge of the supply shelf, one set matched completely with the records of Jonas Klene, a 58-year-old man who had worked as a maintenance laborer in the borax mining area during the 1980s and had lived intermittently on the fringes of Death Valley ever since. Jonas had no record of violent crimes, but he had been documented in NPS reports for trespassing in restricted areas and unauthorized use of closed service roads, which had caused his fingerprints to be entered into the system years earlier. This match immediately made Jonas the first person with a direct connection to the underground bunker that the investigative team had just discovered. At the same time, the footwear impression analysis unit began comparing the shoe prints recovered in the bunker, partial scuff marks, but with sufficient pattern detail for comparison, against databases of potential suspect footwear. The wear pattern and the curvature of the heel indicated that the wearer walked with a slight rightward lean, consistent with a 2008 medical record, noting Jonas had a mild ankle condition. When cross-referenced with the shoe type that Jonas regularly purchased according to customer records at a work equipment store in the town of Beatty, the bunker shoe prints showed high similarity in the rear heel rubber tread pattern, a relatively uncommon design that carried higher evidentiary value than more typical desert footwear impressions. Meanwhile, the vehicle forensics team re-examined the tire tracks documented by Sayar in 2013, previously identified only as belonging to a light truck model from 1997-2004. When analysts queried DMV records within a 60-mile radius of Death Valley, only 6 vehicles registered in that model range remained in the area, and among them, Jonas Klene's pickup truck was the only one with tires matching the tread pattern recovered at the scene, same size, same groove style, and same degree of wear. In addition, maintenance records from a local tire shop showed that Jonas had replaced his truck tires in May 2013, just 2 months before Ethan disappeared, which aligned with the tread depth noted by Sayar at the time. When investigators overlaid all this data onto a map, they noticed that Jonas's cabin was in a particularly noteworthy location. It sat near a dirt road closed since the 1980s, one of the very few routes allowing access to the eastern ridge without passing through park checkpoints. The straight-line distance from the cabin to the bunker entrance was only a few miles, and the actual travel route fully matched the GIS-modeled path that could have taken Ethan from Golden Canyon to the old borax area in a short time. The cabin also lay outside NPS camera surveillance zones, a detail that strengthened the possibility the perpetrator could have moved undetected for many years. When the team checked demographic and financial information, they found Jonas lived alone, with no recorded stable income since leaving mining work. Yet he made large periodic purchases of industrial supplies, including electrical wire, light bulbs, metal locks, and repair tools, items that significantly matched evidence found in the bunker. Credit card data and receipts obtained from a tool store in Pahrump between 2011-2016 showed regular purchasing behavior consistent with someone maintaining a small, isolated technical facility. This layer of information strongly aligned with the bunker maintenance log recovered from the auxiliary room, which recorded repairs to lights, wire replacements, reinforcement of support beams, and a schedule of irregular but consistent supply replenishments. Combining the evidence, matching fingerprints, shoe prints consistent with Jonas's gait anomaly, tire tracks matching his pickup, the cabin's location directly on a feasible route to the bunker, and technical supply purchase records. The federal investigative team officially designated Jonas Klene as the primary suspect in case file DV-13-217. A special report was prepared, compiling all current evidentiary grounds and forwarded to the federal prosecutor's office to prepare an arrest warrant application. In the report, Jonas was described as a suspect with probable access, means geological knowledge, and the capability to maintain a long-term detention facility. Once all data had been verified and linked into a logical chain, the investigative team began drafting the search warrant affidavit for the cabin and the arrest warrant for Jonas, marking a critical shift from person of interest to primary target in the investigation. When the arrest warrant and search warrant were approved, a federal task force coordinated with NPS to deploy to Jonas Klene's cabin, located several miles southwest of the Devil's Golf Course area, where jagged mineral salt terrain and sharp rock fields formed a natural isolated zone. The warrant execution was conducted in the early morning to minimize the chance of the suspect leaving the area and to take advantage of favorable lighting conditions. Jonas's cabin was an old wooden structure built decades earlier, without grid electricity and connected to the outside world only by a narrow dirt track leading straight into an unmarked park region. As the arrest team approached, Jonas was present in the backyard inspecting an iron tool and was taken into custody without resistance. After reading rights and securing the area, the on-scene team began searching the cabin in priority order based on previously gathered leads. In the front room, they found a desk drawer containing numerous loose sheets with sketch diagrams. Some were alternate versions of the hand-drawn map found in Ethan's canvas bag, but more detailed with many annotations in shaky handwriting. These maps showed that Jonas had drawn and revised the tunnel system multiple times over the years, strongly reinforcing his role in constructing or maintaining the underground structure where Ethan was held. In a small tin box on a wooden shelf, investigators discovered a metal key nearly identical to the B-47 key recovered from Ethan's bag, differing only in having less rust. When the engraved code and keyway grooves were compared, technicians confirmed it was a spare key from the same lock system as the one in the victim's evidence. Nearby was an old notebook with a peeling leather cover containing supply log entries such as water 4 weeks, lights, replace wiring, support beams, check, and notes about adding medical and food supplies on a cycle. This notebook directly matched the maintenance log found in the bunker and extended many previously unrecorded time points, proving Jonas had continuously maintained the bunker operation for years. In the rear storage area of the cabin, the team seized numerous repair tools and technical supplies identical to those found in the bunker auxiliary room, industrial-grade wire spools, old-style floodlight bulbs, metal cutting pliers, screws, hinges, and short steel pipes, previously used as support struts. These supplies all appeared in the purchasing categories that the financial analysis team had identified Jonas ordering over many years. In the same storage area, several burlap sacks containing unused materials were found, with fabric-matching fiber samples recovered from Ethan's canvas bag. All evidence was photographed in place, collected according to protocol, and assigned case numbers for later analysis. After completing the search of the cabin and storage, Jonas Klene was transported in a secure vehicle to the federal holding facility near the town of Pahrump for questioning and further processing. Throughout the arrest process, Jonas remained silent, neither refusing nor explaining the items found. The investigative team completed the scene report, sealed the cabin, and transferred all evidence to the Federal Forensic Analysis Center. With the recovery of additional hand-drawn maps, the spare B-47 key supply logs, and matching technical supplies, the team officially locked in the chain of connection between Jonas and the facility where Ethan was held, completing the final step in moving the suspect from surveillance status to custody in furtherance of case DV-13217. Once all evidence recovered from the underground bunker and Jonas Klein's cabin had been confirmed by the identification system to have direct links, the investigative team began reconstructing the abduction sequence based on 2013 scene data, Ethan's GPS records, SR documented traces, and forensic evidence. By re-establishing the timeline from when Ethan entered Golden Canyon until his GPS signal went dark at 6:12 p.m., the team built the most plausible offender approach model. Jonas observed trailhead areas from a distance, waiting for Ethan to separate from the main path and turn into a less traveled side branch. Based on footwear data and Jonas's mobility, investigators believed he approached Ethan from behind a rock outcrop where visibility was obstructed and used an agent to render Ethan unable to resist for a short period. Forensic medical analysis, particularly the lack of clear blunt force trauma during the initial capture phase, suggested the perpetrator may have used an environmental trap, such as creating a sudden high-temperature space or oxygen-deprived pocket, causing the victim to become dizzy and lose consciousness quickly. The strong winds and narrow terrain of the Golden Canyon side branch allowed the offender to exploit natural elements to reduce Ethan's ability to call for help or resist. Once Ethan was incapacitated, the GIS-modeled transport model and SAR-recorded tire tracks indicated the offender removed him from the area using an older model pickup truck. The only remaining traces, a long drag mark and tire impressions in a vehicle-prohibited zone, matched Jonas pulling or moving Ethan to a parking point not far from the trailhead, but out of tourist sightlines. The Badlands terrain and rock slope structure allowed an old vehicle to move without being captured by park cameras, especially since Jonas knew the exact closed routes that were still traversable. After extracting Ethan from the legal trekking zone, the timeline model showed the transport to the Old Harmony Borax worksite area took less than 1 hour, consistent with Ethan's GPS abruptly going dark without further signals. When evaluating the containment methods used during Ethan's 4 missing years, the team relied on traces in the bunker, fixed metal chains, one-way industrial bulbs, small uniform scuff marks on the concrete floor, as well as hair stratification and soft tissue damage. Laboratory samples confirmed Ethan was confined to under 3 square meters, with movement restricted to the point of severe lower limb muscle atrophy. Nutrition was controlled on a cycle, as shown by hair keratin analysis, indicating the offender did not fully nourish the victim, but provided only minimal rations to sustain long-term life. Meanwhile, sedative substances in Ethan's blood showed he was placed in periodic mild suppression states, allowing the offender to control psychophysiological functions without complete immobilization. This was reinforced by the bunker structure. The single industrial bulb was positioned to create artificial light, dark cycles, while preventing Ethan from seeing real time, leading to time disorientation. Wall tally marks exceeding 1,000 clusters showed Ethan attempted to track days independently, but this also suggested the offender permitted the victim to exist in repeating mental cycles without accurate reality measurement. Analysis of scratch marks, floor abrasions, and declining mineral levels in hair samples further indicated periods when Ethan tried to break chains or alter his state in the room without success. The auxiliary room infrastructure and large quantity of supplies proved Jonas planned long-term detention, with periodic access via ventilation passages for resupply and bunker repairs. From the aggregated data, the investigative team concluded that the offender's behavior was not impulsive, but demonstrated meticulous preparation, clear geological knowledge, the ability to operate a discrete long-term detention facility, and systematic control of the victim, both physiologically and psychologically. The reconstructed abduction model, thus reinforced the conclusion that Ethan Marlowe's 2013 disappearance was not a trekking accident, but a systematic long-term captivity carried out according to a tightly calculated process by the offender. After establishing the abduction method and control measures employed by Jonas Klene, the forensic unit proceeded with an in-depth 4-year confinement reconstruction by synthesizing data from floor wear patterns, hair stratification, dust fiber samples collected throughout the bunker, and wall tally marks to rebuild Ethan's sequence of existence, phase by phase. First, technicians measured the entire concrete floor surface of the cell, using oblique lighting and surface sensors to record the depth and shape of each wear zone. The scuff marks formed 2 offset circular arcs. The larger arc corresponded to the range Ethan could move while anchored by ankle chains, while the smaller arc indicated repeated in-place movements, likely shifting steps to maintain balance as his body weakened. Deeper wear at certain spots suggested periods of more vigorous activity, most likely during the early months of confinement when he still had sufficient physical strength. Conversely, very shallow wear zones indicated markedly reduced mechanical activity, consistent with medical analysis showing cyclic muscle deterioration. In parallel, hair stratification was performed on the longest hair sample collected from Ethan, segmented according to an average growth rate of 1 centimeter per month. Results revealed a clear repeating pattern of 3 cycles: minimal nutrition phase, starvation or extremely low nutrition phase, and temporary recovery phase. This cycle recurred regularly at 4 6-week intervals, producing a timeline graph nearly synchronized with fluctuations in floor wear depth, showing Jonas maintained a feeding, starvation rule to control Ethan's physical condition throughout the captivity. The forensics team further analyzed dust and fibers collected from multiple bunker locations. Dust samples adhering to support beams, light bulbs, and storage niches showed layered sediment changes. The oldest dust layer contained high borate content and large crystals, matching pre-2010 conditions. The intermediate dust layer showed higher movement frequency inside the bunker due to numerous coarse fabric fibers similar to burlap sacks. Coinciding with periods of supply replacement noted in maintenance logs, the surface dust on chains and bed contained many fine modern clothing fibers, including synthetics matching Ethan's clothing when found. This enabled the forensics team to delineate 3 distinct existence phases in the bunker: pre-Ethan phase, stable Ethan confinement phase, and final phase, with sharply reduced movement, reflecting Ethan's severe terminal decline. Regarding chronology, the Special Analysis Unit focused particularly on the tally marks engraved on the wall. Using high-resolution photography and incision direction analysis, experts determined the marks were made with a small hard object, likely a key ring or metal chain fragment. When cross-referenced with hair stratification and Death Valley weather data, the timeline model aligned. The tally marks appeared in stable cycles, with cluster counts closely corresponding to 48 months of underground existence. A notable detail was 3 gaps in the tally sequence, matching 3 hair phases, showing sudden cortisol spikes, likely due to relocation within the bunker or prolonged light deprivation beyond normal. When all these data were combined, the reconstructed timeline showed Ethan endured 4 years in a closed pattern, rapid debilitation in the early months, a controlled but nutritionally and mobility-restricted stable phase, severe terminal decline before extraction, reflected in sharply reduced protein levels and extremely shallow floor wear. Overall, the analysis chain confirmed Ethan was continuously confined in the underground bunker under systematically manipulated biological, psychological cycles, with the entire trace structure mutually supporting a consistent 4-year timeline without internal gaps or contradictions, thereby solidifying the forensic case strength in DV 13217. After the forensic reconstruction of Ethan Marlowe's 4 years of captivity was completed, and the entire chain of evidence linking Jonas Klene to the underground tunnel beneath the Old Harmony Borax worksite reached the necessary level of consistency, the U.S. Attorney's Office initiated the prosecution process in accordance with the proper sequence for a case involving federal kidnapping and systematic detention. The first step was to establish the list of charges based on physical evidence, indirect victim statements, and forensic data. 1. Kidnapping under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 1201, due to the act of removing Ethan from a lawful route within a national park and transporting him across a restricted federal area. 2. Aggravated torture, based on evidence of old bone injuries, soft tissue damage, shackle marks, hair analysis, and nutritional cycles, indicating Ethan was maintained in a state of controlled pain. 3. Attempted murder, due to cyclic starvation, severe movement restriction, and the use of light bulbs and electrical wires in an unsafe environment, all capable of causing death if prolonged. And 4. False imprisonment in an illegally constructed underground detention facility with locking mechanisms and restraint devices demonstrating intent for long-term confinement. After identifying the core charges, federal prosecutors requested the compilation of all evidence to build the prosecution file. The investigative team transferred the complete physical evidence from the tunnel and cabin, including matching fingerprints, shoe prints, the B-47 key, technical tunnel diagrams, maintenance logs, multiple versions of hand-drawn maps, and repair supplies consistent with the tunnel structure. DNA samples from the chains, bed, and cell walls were confirmed to contain Ethan's cells, strengthening the direct link. Microenvironmental samples, dust, fibers, minerals, and the 2013 GIS movement reconstruction simulation were also incorporated into the file as supporting technical evidence. Concurrently, the administrative records team retrieved Jonas's purchase history, prior violation records, vehicle information, DMV data, and financial transactions related to the purchase of technical supplies matching the equipment in the underground tunnel. All items were cataloged into separate appendices, numbered, and cross-referenced to each element of the charges in legal sequence. The Federal Forensic Analysis Center also completed a comprehensive 3-part report: 1. Biological injury analysis, 2. Infrastructure trace analysis in the tunnel, and 3. Timeline reconstruction model, enabling prosecutors to demonstrate the systematic, prolonged, and intentional nature of the confinement. Once the file achieved sufficient volume and consistency, the U.S. Attorney's Office presented the case to the grand jury. The special grand jury tasked with reviewing the file and determining whether there was sufficient basis to issue a federal indictment. During the hours-long presentation, prosecutors highlighted key pieces of evidence: Jonas's fingerprints on the tunnel hatch and supply shelves, technical tunnel diagrams drawn by Jonas, shoe prints matching the defendant's foot condition, maintenance logs with dates aligning with Ethan's captivity period, and hair analysis showing prolonged starvation cycles. The grand jury was also shown a 3D simulation of the tunnel layout, the method of victim approach, and a vehicle movement model along the closed dirt route Jonas could have used. The logical chain of evidence, from the moment Ethan vanished, the GPS signal cutoff, matching tire tracks to Jonas's vehicle, and items in the cabin, was presented in a way that allowed the grand jury to see the entire case structure as a closed, leak-proof system. After reviewing all materials, the grand jury unanimously approved the federal indictment on all 4 proposed counts. With this decision, the case officially moved to the next phase, the criminal trial, where all evidence, witnesses, and forensic models would be presented in court to fully establish Jonas Kline's conduct in the kidnapping and 4-year detention of Ethan Marlowe. To prepare for this process, prosecutors began compiling the witness list, strengthening arguments, and completing pretrial procedural steps. The federal trial of Jonas Kline began in a heightened security courtroom where prosecutors presented the chain of evidence in proper legal order to prove systematic kidnapping, prolonged detention, and intentional infliction of serious harm on Ethan Marlowe. First, they introduced fingerprints recovered from the auxiliary room and cell, a complete match to Jonas. Next, shoe prints on the concrete floor, showing characteristic axial misalignment consistent with the defendant's ankle condition. Then, prosecutors presented the B-47 key, found in Jonas's cabin, and the hand-drawn map identified as a more complete version of the one in Ethan's possession, proving the defendant had full access to and control over the tunnel system. Forensic reports were displayed: hair stratification showing starvation, refeeding cycles, floor wear patterns indicating extremely restricted movement range, and ankle injuries consistent with prolonged shackling. Next came the GIS model reconstructing the 2013 travel route, matching Jonas's truck and SAR recorded tire tracks. Investigative experts testified in turn. The infrastructure specialist described the tunnel structure maintained over many years. The forensic biologist confirmed Ethan's injuries could only occur in a controlled confinement environment. The geologist proved borate fragments and dust matched the Old Harmony Borax worksite location where the tunnel was found. The defendant remained silent throughout the trial and offered no rebuttal when confronted with the Polaroid collection depicting other victims who had appeared in the tunnel. In the closing argument, prosecutors asserted that the interlocking chain of evidence was irrefutable. The defendant had the means, the physical facility, geological knowledge, traces inside the tunnel, and maintenance logs matching Ethan's captivity timeline. The defense counsel presented no plausible alternative hypothesis and failed to explain the presence of evidence in the defendant's cabin. After 3 days of trial, the jury retired to deliberate. In under 5 hours, they returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. The federal judge pronounced sentence, life imprisonment without parole for kidnapping and aggravated torture, plus 40 years for attempted murder and false imprisonment, to run consecutively. Jonas Klene was escorted from the courtroom in absolute silence, marking the legal conclusion of a case once considered a hopeless disappearance, but now recognized as one of the most serious long-term unlawful detention cases in U.S. national park history. After Jonas Klene's sentencing and the official legal closure of case DV-13-217, the Federal Investigative System and National Park Service conducted a comprehensive review of the case's impact on search and rescue procedures and handling of missing persons cases in national parks. The first report identified that Ethan Marlowe's reappearance after 4 years missing exposed a major gap in traditional SAR campaigns. The assumption of environmental disappearance could lead to downplaying signs of criminal activity, especially in areas with complex terrain and industrial mining history, like Death Valley. To address this, NPS introduced a new protocol requiring micro-evidence analysis and geological data from SAR Level 1, whenever a missing person deviates from a registered trail without leaving expected natural traces. Case DV-13-217 also prompted the reopening of pre-2013 missing persons files, particularly those near Old Harmony Borax worksite or along closed dirt routes from the 1980s onward. A dedicated task force was formed to review at least 14 unresolved disappearances, 3 of which shared similarities in timing of last contact, planned route, and sudden loss of personal device signals. Polaroids recovered from the tunnel's auxiliary room were cross-referenced with the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System (NAMIS), with initial results indicating at least 2 faces potentially matching individuals missing since the early 2000s, opening new investigative avenues beyond the Ethan Marlowe case. In parallel with file reviews, NPS and industrial structure investigation units assessed the possibility of additional undocumented underground tunnels or abandoned workings in former mining areas. The discovery of a single ventilation shaft leading into the confinement tunnel just below the sediment layer prompted experts to question how many similar structures remain unmapped in the park. A region-wide LiDAR and drone survey of the borate area was launched, prioritizing zones showing subsidence or anomalous terrain features. Preliminary reports identified at least 4 areas with geological anomalies suggesting possible voids or old tunnels, though their original purpose remains undetermined. From a criminal investigative perspective, DV-13-217 became a textbook example demonstrating the value of integrating microanalysis, GIS technology, terrain modeling, and biological stratification to reconstruct crimes in wilderness environments. Key lessons summarized include: 1. When a missing person vanishes in a time frame too short for reasonable travel distance, immediately consider vehicle intervention. 2. Areas with industrial mining history should be treated as risk factors due to potential covered underground structures. 3. Small artifacts like electrical wire, fabric fibers, or alloy fragments can be pivotal clues if completely alien to the natural environment. 4. Hair analysis and micro-injuries can provide accurate timelines of confinement conditions. And 5. Premature case closure can miss opportunities to detect organized crime in wilderness settings. Ultimately, DV-13-217 was incorporated into advanced training programs for federal search and rescue and investigative personnel as a model illustrating the importance of interdisciplinary approaches in missing persons investigations. NPS concluded that Ethan Marlowe was not only a surviving victim, but also a pivotal factor in exposing a forgotten network of underground structures and a previously undocumented method of long-term criminal confinement, paving the way for new approaches to investigation and safety management in protected areas. The story of case DV-13-217, from the moment Ethan Marlowe vanished in Death Valley in 2013 to his return, after 4 years of secret captivity, reflects an important reality in modern American life. Even in a nation with advanced security infrastructure and professional rescue systems, vast natural areas like national parks still harbor risks that cannot be taken lightly. Ethan's case revealed a once common perceptual blind spot. Many Americans believe disappearances in national parks are almost always due to accidents, exhaustion, or getting lost. Yet this case reminds us that criminal acts can hide in seemingly safe spaces. The initial SAR failure to detect unnatural signs, such as tire tracks in vehicle-prohibited areas, unfamiliar footprints, or sudden GPS signal loss, serves as a reminder that in real life, people often overlook small details without clear context. The forensic conclusion regarding prolonged light deprivation, shackle marks on the ankles, and starvation, refeeding cycles in Ethan's hair, also shows that long-term victim traces can begin with microscopic details we fail to notice. In today's world, where many Americans enjoy outdoor activities, this story underscores the importance of clearly sharing travel plans, using two-way locating devices instead of single GPS units, and reporting anomalous behavior when traces don't match the environment. At the same time, the NPS lesson that assuming natural risk can delay investigation applies to everyday life. Always consider possibilities beyond the expected, even if they seem unlikely. Ethan's story is not merely a personal tragedy, but a reminder for every American to be more conscious of personal safety, vigilant in seemingly harmless spaces, and trusting of intuition when something feels off. Because sometimes the smallest detail is what saves a life. If you found this investigation story, full of hidden layers, useful, and want to continue following mysterious cases across the United States, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you for watching, and see you again in the journey to uncover the next case, where every tiny detail might just reveal a much larger truth.